Hello, and welcome to the Beyond B2B Marketing Podcast. I'm your host, Lee Odden, CEO of Top Rank Marketing, and today we're talking with a B2B marketing leader that epitomizes the role of a marketer's marketer. She started and sold an agency. She's led marketing teams at multiple companies and is now Senior Vice President of Marketing and Growth at Pavilion, a 10,000 plus member private community for go-to-market leaders. And of course, I'm talking about Kathleen Booth. Welcome, Kathleen.
Hi, Lee. Thanks for having me on. I'm very honored to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. We've been connected for a long time, and it's great to be able to, bring that real world into the digital and maybe even back out again. When you and I are both going to be at Cannes next year, right?
We're making it happen. We've put it out into the universe. So
exactly.
It shall be.
It shall be. Well, let's get started by helping folks understand first about Pavilion, and then also, how did you come into your role there?
So I was actually a member of Pavilion before I started working here. I've been working in B2B tech for a number of years, generally as an early stage marketing leader. And it was 2019, I think was the year. And I was looking for a new role, and I circulated my resume to some marketers that I really, really respected. And I started getting great interviews with New York City based tech companies. And for those who don't know me, I am not based in New York City. I am based in the tech mecca of Annapolis, Maryland, said tongue in cheek. And I was like, this is great. How are you hearing about me? And at the time, they all said, oh, the New York Revenue Collective, which Revenue Collective was the old name for Pavilion. And so started looking into it, figured out that my resume had been shared there and thought, oh, wow, this is a network I need to be a part of. And so I joined back then, and the community has grown considerably in the interim. As you said, we're now more than 10,000 members around the world. In 2022, I have the opportunity, after serving as our founding co-chair of the Washington, D.C. chapter, I had the opportunity to join the company as the head of marketing. And what a great opportunity. I mean, as a marketer, to be able to step in and market a product that I've deeply experienced as a customer that has had such an impact on my life. Like, I think those opportunities don't come around very often. And so it was a no-brainer for me. And it's been a lot of fun in the past almost 3 years.
Well, you're definitely in the right role. I heard of Pavilion obviously because of you. The work that you're doing to evangelize, shine a light yourself on the work and the benefits of Pavilion, and also just thought leadership in general as a representative. That's why I love that marketer's marketer kind of expression, is that you're absolutely demonstrating that and walking the talk. I'm kind of curious, as far as folks that come into the Pavilion community, what are people join, there's a lot of different communities, I guess, people can join as marketers broadly, but in B2B, there's less. And I'm just kind of wondering what categories of member are there, if there are categories, right? Are they leaders of companies? Are they leaders of marketing organizations? Are they thought leaders? What are you seeing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I guess I'll start with the kind of community that we are, because you're right. There's a lot of different communities out there, particularly for marketers. And we're not specifically for marketers. We're actually for go-to-market leaders, which we define as the heads of sales and marketing and customer success, RevOps, partnerships, and then the CEO founder to a certain extent. But we're really about that V or C level operator who leads a component of the broader revenue or go-to-market team and reports to the CEO. And because those roles are highly pressure-filled, volatile, can be stressful. The spotlight is shining on you. The ownership of the revenue number is in some part resting on you. And there's really no good playbook for how to do the role, partly because the role constantly evolves. Literally, the ground is shifting under us every day. Today with AI, it's happening. So that's who we serve. And I think what makes that interesting is like a lot of our members are also members of marketing communities, and they join Pavilion because we do help them become great marketers. There is a marketing sub-community, but we're first and foremost about how do you succeed in your role And I think succeeding in your role, especially at the executive level, is about more than mastering your discipline. Like when you get to be a CMO or an SVP of marketing, the assumption is that you're already good at marketing, right? Like, so we're not primarily focused on let's teach you how to do ABM or how to run a demand gen campaign. Like we've assumed you know that. What we're teaching you is what does it take to succeed in that executive level position, meaning like how do you master unit economics so that you can go toe to toe in the boardroom with the board and the investors and the CEO in terms of understanding the dynamics of the business. How do you become a great leader? What makes for great communication, executive presence, all of these aspects, and also how do you develop empathy for your counterparts on the ELT team? Like if you're a CMO, you need to understand the role of the chief revenue officer and the chief customer officer and the CFO so that you have that first team mentality and you know how to work well with them. So like that's, I think, our unique niche that we've carved out. And so the types of people that join our core membership is that executive, that head of the function reporting to the CEO. And then we do have another level of membership for the director level and below who reports into them, which is, I would characterize that as the leader of tomorrow, who we're trying. And for them, we are in part teaching them how to master their skill as well as how to develop that leadership muscle.
Well, I really appreciate that clarification and that differentiation really from a number of other communities that are out there. The research that I had done for an article recently on what are the labor market trends for senior, in this case, marketing leaders, and increasingly there's this interesting combination of business level savvy that is desired, right? In combination with things like creative and technical skills, change management skills, so it's more than just the marketing that folks are looking for, hiring authorities are looking for now. And so that's very interesting that you're serving that up. You're empowering people with those skills.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fundamental challenge that birthed Pavilion is that people in these roles tend not to last more than a year and a half. The turnover is massive. And the anxiety and stress and pressure that produces is also pretty massive. And so I do think that there's like that is what propels people to seek out community, where you're in these high stress, high pressure roles. The odds are somewhat stacked against you in terms of longevity. And that's not a problem when you're living in a time where there's a lot of jobs, but right now things are volatile, right? And so that even fuels the fire a little bit more. And what we've discovered is that not only do you need like a support group effectively, but the best way to learn and actually stay abreast of best practices in whatever you're doing, because of the pace of change, the best way is to learn through your peers, because you're never going to be able to listen to enough podcasts and read enough books and, newsletters and blogs to self-educate to the extent that you probably need to. You need a network of people who are in the trenches at the same time as you are, testing things and able to give you immediate feedback on here's what's working here, here's what's not, here's what I'm learning. And together, like it's a 1 + 1 = 3 kind of a situation where as a community, you can rise and really be successful.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There's a real hunger in this sort of age of AI that we're in for the human connection and, what's real, what's trustworthy. And that expression, it takes a village, it seems to be is as true for go-to-market leaders as it is for anything else. So when folks come in at either level, I mean, what are they looking for? Like you have a sort of mandate and charter for the organization, right, to serve these needs. And I'm sure there's a dynamic where you're iterating and modifying what it is that's on offer, as it were, based on community feedback and behaviors. But like, what is it that you find that they're really looking for right now? Is it just the connection? Is it just the support, or is there what else?
It's different for each person, but I think we can group them. So I, in fact, right now I'm working on something for Pavilion where I've identified what I call moments that matter in somebody's career arc. And those moments that matter, my hypothesis is that those are things that drive people to seek out community. And so a great example of this is somebody just got a new job, right? I just became a CMO for the first time. That is a moment in my career where community can really have an outsized impact on my success. I'm entering a new role. I know I'm going to need a plan for the first 90 days to prove that I was the right person for the job. So the best way to do that is, there are great books on it, some of which are sitting on the shelf behind me. Your CMO first 100 or 90 days or whatever it is. But really what you need is you need to go into a community and be able to say, hey, CMOs, what did you do in your first 90 days that made you successful? And so when people tend to join Pavilion, they come because we offer CMO school. And very often, a lot of people come for the courses because the courses solve for a moment that matters. So whether it's I just got a new job, or I just got promoted, or we just raised a round of funding, so I have new investors and therefore new pressure, or there's a new CEO in town, or I just got laid off or fired. Like all of these moments drive a need. And oftentimes our courses are the first thing that somebody recognizes as that could be a very quick answer to my immediate problem. So we do find a lot of people join for Pavilion University programming. And then a lot of people stay for the network. And other people, I think we do hear people say, oh, I came because literally everyone I know on LinkedIn is already a member. So I was like, I feel like I should be in there too. Right. So there's a little bit of that, but I think it is always about, we all have these different journeys through our careers, and Pavilion has meant different things to me at different stages in my career. At one point it was finding a job, and another point it was being successful in that first 90 days. Then it was building out my network. And so like we're trying to compile a suite of offerings through the community membership that together is able to serve you through that unending career journey as an executive leader and go to market.
Wow, that's powerful. So clearly there's a role and a purpose that a community serves, like the one that Pavilion does. But what about for a brand, a B2B, or like, this is all about B2B marketing, so I'm going to focus there. But what about brands? Like, does it make sense? How much does it make sense for them to build a community of their own?
I think the answer is obviously it depends. As all good answers are. But here's what it depends on. Because I've worked for companies that have built communities in addition to Pavilion, and those that have not. And what I've observed is that community can be an extremely powerful growth lever, but only if you go in prepared to make the investment and prepared that this is a long-term play. It is not, let's spin up a user community and 3 months from now, we're going to be measuring this like flood of new pipeline that comes in. That is not generally how it works. I'm sure there are exceptions, but where I've seen it work well is where the CEO and the board understand that community is first and foremost a brand play, and they're willing to give it the time, a few years to really like play out and bake, and they're resourcing it appropriately. So first experience I had with this was when I worked at an agency called Impact, and we had a 5,000 member marketing community there that this will date me. It lived on Facebook, and that I would not build there again today. But at the time it was a great place. And what made that successful was that the CEO had the foresight to understand the importance of the community, and he hired a person whose full-time job was director of audience engagement and community. And that person, literally, her mandate was get to know everybody in this community, be in there every day, make sure that anybody who posts a question is getting an answer, is connected to a person who has an answer, make introductions, just like roll out the welcome mat and make sure the experience is great. And we did more than just that, but like that investment and that continuity of having a person whose job it was to ensure that we didn't focus just on getting you in the community, because I think that's where a lot of brands, where this all falls apart, is they're so focused on like, we have to build the community and get people in, and then they don't really have a good plan for what happens once you get there. And that's really where the magic happens. And that's where like all of Pavilion's growth historically has really come from word of mouth, happy members referring other happy members, and happy members. To get to that, it's not just like, oh, they joined. There has to be some there once they're in the community.
Yeah. What happens if you're successful?
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Have a plan. Yeah.
So to your original question, like I do think that, there's a place for it at any stage of business. There are some really early stage businesses that have built community and been very successful. And there are some that haven't. And just the same could be said for larger companies. It's all about like what your perspective is, how quickly you're expecting ROI, and how you're resourcing it. And if you do it well, I think it can be a great opportunity for almost any kind of a business.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a relationship. It's something that where relationships are central to it. And of course, relationships are not, something that you just turn on or off. It's an investment. It's always on. It's something that can create value for a long time, obviously. But it's something that does require a commitment. And that makes I appreciate you making that point.
And habit. I would just throw in, like, you need to build a habit amongst your community members that they come to the community and participate. And that can only happen with regularity and regular value. So,
yeah. So when it comes to choosing a model, right, I've seen in the past have made some distinction between different models, like I think it was product, practice, and interest. So I'm kind of curious, let's say an organization leader does want to invest and they're starting from scratch. How do you decide, what model? Do you have to decide what model to choose?
I think you should decide, honestly. I think if you're going to make the investment in community, you should go in with a strategy. And part of that strategy is identifying what type of community are we building and how does that serve our ultimate goal. So to your point, I do talk about 3 different types. Communities of product are pretty straightforward. It's like, you guys are all users of our product. And a great example of that today is Clay. Clay has a really vibrant user community where people share all the cool ways they're using the product. And back in the day, I was a member of the HubSpot partner community, which was a fantastic community. And we were very product oriented. Then there's communities of practice. I would argue that Pavilion is a community of practice because we are the people who are the practitioners of go-to-market. And so our organizing principle is around the discipline of go-to-market. And so you might have, just to your point, there's communities of marketers, of salespeople, like the things that we practice as professionals. And then there are communities of interest, and these are broad, and like each one of these gets broader, right? Like a product community is the narrowest, then the practice, and then the interest is the largest. And interest would be like a entrepreneurship community, for example, or a fitness community. And so I think each of those has different, ROI models, different objectives, different investment levels required. And so I think, again, you have to really understand what your objective is when you determine that. And that'll dictate then spend and ROI.
So that makes me think of a question around opportunism versus intention. So surely there are communities that have spawned accidentally, if you will, like there was elements of product or practice or interest that brought like-minded folks together, and someone to decide, I think I'm going to build a community around this. And they're also probably more often on the brand side of things, where, it was a plan, right? There's a strategy. This fits with our business strategy, our marketing strategy, or customer engagement strategy, if it's a customer advisory council kind of thing, or a customer focused type of community. And then they follow a particular plan to go for that. Are you seeing that in the wild, or like, are you seeing spontaneous? That's not the right word, but I think you know what I mean, where it's opportunistic as opposed to, starting from scratch, nothing exists whatsoever, and now we're going to put a stake in the ground and say we are going to build community.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the crawl, walk, run approach. And a great example of this that you can see unfolding before your eyes right now is there's a community called Wednesday Women, which is Leslie Greenwood and Melissa Moody. And they started it as just every Wednesday LinkedIn post featuring a woman. And then they started hosting little events, and it kind of gained steam, right? And so now they've unrolled it as a formal community where they accept membership and you pay for it, and it has a home base. And so I think, and Leslie, who runs it, she used to work at Pavilion. So she's got, some experience with community. And I think that was a smart way to do it, because you're proving out the concept before you're making all the investment. And so I think that's a really interesting way to do it. I think that, there's other cases where companies just launch them because they know they want it to be part of their strategy and they're like, we're all in, let's go.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So a lot of folks, start something like this, don't understand what a big bite they're taking, and the community sort of, maybe they even plateau, or they, like you say, haven't planned for what do we do when we're successful, and so they kind of flatten out. I don't know if you've had experience with that or not, but what is it about community that inspires membership quality, and even membership activity? I mean, you nodded to that a little bit already.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced this a couple times. And I think there's a variety of reasons that things either plateau or even I would go so far as to say fall apart. And I'll start with like, what do people want, right? Like community is about commonality. And in fact, I always talk about how like this notion of community is not new. I think we talk about it in B2B terms and in digital terms like it's new, but it's like the oldest archaeological concept practically that exists. Like when they're excavating the ruins in ancient Egypt, they're looking at like, was there a community here? And how are we going to tell? And so when you look at archaeology, there's like, what constitutes a community? It's like a location. And in modern B2B terms, that location could be digital. It could be Slack. It could be Circle. It could be a LinkedIn group. So there's a location though, where people come together. There's a common language, which could literally mean like English or French, or it could mean like, hey, we all speak the language of go-to-market, right? There's rituals, which, might be like how we gather or the rules or the values of the community. And so like, those are a couple of the principles. There's some kind of like social compact, if you will, that governs communities, and that can manifest in different ways. So that's kind of like esoteric. And I would say when you look at examples of where communities have plateaued or fallen apart, you can usually trace it back to a failure of one of those things. And so I'll give you some examples of what I mean by that. I was a member of, there was a broader like HubSpot community that at one point lived on as a LinkedIn group, and it was really vibrant. This was in the early days. And then they decided to build their own, I think it was either they built it or they bought, they had a separate community platform and they wanted to move it from LinkedIn to this other place. And so, as you'll recall, I said in archaeology, one of the things is a location. Well, everything completely fell apart when they did that. Like it just never recovered because the location was one of the central tenets that made the community what it was. And it's not that you can never move, but like these are the most fragile, crucial elements that constitute the foundation of the community. So it has to be done really well. There's another community that I'm not going to mention that I'm technically a member of, although I never go there. And it really fell apart for me because it was a combination of, it got really big, which in and of itself might not be a problem, but it got big. And I felt like there wasn't commonality. Like there was too many different kinds of people in it. And so the work I had to do to weed through the noise to find relevance was too much. And so that goes back again to that sense of commonality. Like there's some common language, common tie, social compact values, et cetera, that bring us together. And so those are just some examples, but like, I think size often does kill communities. And at Pavilion, we've struggled at this at different points in our history. Like, oh, we're getting really big and people are like the OGs start to complain. It's not the small place it used to be. And so there are, as with, I think, physical communities, like even if you go from living in a small town to New York City, you can still find community, but usually how you do it is you find your small group within the big place. And so I think that's a challenge for communities is like, as you grow, how do you preserve a sense of intimacy and trust and belonging at a smaller level within that larger crowd? How do you protect those foundational elements of the values of the community, that they're consistently enforced, the locus, the place where people meet, and make sure that that's a place that's convenient? Like I'm a member of a marketing community that lives on Circle. I never go to it. I get the emails, but I never go to the community because it's not part of my daily workflow, which is part of why we're still on Slack at Pavilion. So all these different considerations, but like ultimately it's about the quality of the people in there, the commonality you feel with them, the quality of the conversation, and the convenience of accessing that community within your daily life.
So a lot of the community characteristics that we're talking about are virtual, but what about real world experiences connected to a virtual or online community? I mean, so I'm talking about events, right? How important do you think events are? And I mean, obviously there could be online events, but I kind of mean I'm a little leaning a little more towards the physical events. How important are they for community? And also, I'm curious what you feel, what role events play in marketing in general, like real world events.
I think that events are essential for community, for the same reason that they're more important than ever as part of a broader marketing motion today. Pavilion grew the fastest during COVID, which is when, nobody could go to events, and the need that built was like so pointed, and people saw, I mean, we did virtual things, and it fueled our growth because people craved so badly that feeling of connection that it's very hard to replace what you get in person. And so virtual was a band-aid for us. But as soon as COVID ended, all anybody wanted was to be in person. Nobody wanted to go on Zoom anymore. And I think there's still that feeling of like, Zoom is not a replacement for in person. We as human beings, we need to be around other people so acutely. And I've always said with community that you can build an amazing community, but the emotional glue or the cement that holds it together is not ever really set until people begin to meet in person. I really believe that. And it's so funny. Like, we talk about this all the time at Pavilion, how we'll hold our annual conference, and some people kind of think it's weird, but I love it. You'll have people come in when they're first arriving and they've never met each other in person before. And they're like, Lee, and they're walking up and hugging each other. And it's such a unique phenomenon where you could be complete strangers from different parts of the world who've never physically been in the same city before, and you're greeting each other with a hug, like you're long lost siblings or something. And that's because community offers a level of trust and belonging and relationship that you can't get elsewhere. But that, like I said, what cements it is that meeting. And so I think in-person events are so important for harnessing the energy and the emotion of community. And for the same reason, as marketers, we're ultimately, everything boils down to trust and how that translates into a motivation to purchase. And I think trust, it can certainly be established virtually, but is so much more powerful when it's established in person. And it's also so much more enduring. And it's never been more true than it is right now with AI. And for the same reason, this is one reason I'm so happy I work in a community-based business, because, we talk all the time about this existential question of like, what jobs will exist in the future? And I truly believe like there will always be a need for community, because it is so essential to our human nature, that need for connection.
Spot on. Yeah, absolutely. And there just isn't any substitute for that in-person interaction. I'll tell you, I remember when we met in person, that was at a dinner at a Marketing Profs event or something like that.
Marketing Profs B2B Marketing Forum in the fall of 2019.
And we were so lucky to have Ann Hanley came to our dinner. It was like amazing, our tiny little group of people, but that was a really meaningful experience. And that stuck with me over the years, even though, we're virtually interacting here and there, and certainly had a lot to do with, I think, even, thinking about, okay, who should I have on the show? Like, who's somebody that I feel good about? And because it's not just about the other stuff, it's about who do I feel good about, because we're trying to, create a great experience for our listeners and our viewers too. So I really appreciate that. We've been able to stay connected since then, and it was very meaningful.
Yeah, I think it's really telling that I can barely remember what I had for lunch yesterday, but I remember the date that I met you from 6 years ago. So
amazing.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Clay as an example. Are there any other examples of B2B companies that come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, 6 Sense has done an outstanding job of this. I really have to tip my hat to Latney Kanat. She built the CMO Coffee Talk community. And it was funny because I was there from the beginning. I can say that because I'll never forget. I went to a breakfast that she hosted with Matt Hines back in the fall, or I think it was early winter 2020. And we were at a breakfast. There was no community yet. It was just a series of CMO breakfasts. And we were talking about this pandemic and what it might mean. And what if we have to shift events to virtual? And within a month after that, that's exactly what happened. They built the community as a way to keep the breakfast series going. And today it's a huge community. And what I think Sixth Sense has done really, really well is they have held the line that this is not a place to pitch Sixth Sense as a platform. They've really kept it as this is a community for marketers where we talk about marketing. Everybody knows Sixth Sense is the brand behind it, but they're not, pitching us. They're not spamming us. And they've really played the long game. And, here's a VC-backed company where the VCs have allowed them to do that also. So kudos to Latney, who is now CRO. She was the CMO, who obviously was persuasive enough to convey why it was so important to not try to convert that into like a direct pipeline generator. Although I think that they would say it is a direct pipeline generator. They just don't pepper the community with offers. And they've done it really well.
I think that's a really meaningful observation too, because playing the long game is where the greatest ROI is going to come from in all the definitions of ROI, not just the fiscal, of course, but also the return on relationship, as it were, right? And there's a lot of cumulative value, momentum that comes with that. So let's switch up a little bit. So one thing I've noticed, a couple of things about, first is about Pavilion is, I started playing around on Reddit a lot in the last year, and it took me a long time to finally start spending time there. It's been super useful. And of course, I'm seeing ads from Pavilion there, and I don't see that many, ads of a similar nature, of a business nature, so much. I mean, sometimes there's software or whatever, but so I'm just kind of curious about, what can you share, or can you share anything about your experience as an advertiser on Reddit and any other, non-traditional alternative channels, as it were?
Yeah, it's early days. And I will say it's not the first time I've led marketing at a company where we've advertised on Reddit. I did this back when I was at Clean.io. We were in the ad tech space, and the ad tech community is pretty active on Reddit. It's a really interesting balance, because you may have observed this, but Redditors love nothing more than to tear into advertisers. They don't like advertising, which I think is really funny, because advertising is what allows Reddit to exist without charging user fees. So, don't hate the player, hate the game, I guess. But it is a fine balance to strike. Like, you don't want to do your ads in a way that you alienate the Reddit audience. And so we're pretty early still. I think we've been doing it for like 2 months now, maybe just under 2 months. And what we like about Reddit, there are a couple things. One is that conversation on Reddit is definitely used to inform a lot of large language models. And so, like, from a discoverability standpoint, there's some interesting aspects of Reddit. And ads don't necessarily play into that, but I think there's a case to be made that advertising there spurs conversation. But also the cost per click is way lower than LinkedIn. And so, we're also advertising aggressively on LinkedIn, but it's expensive. And so we try to use LinkedIn for the initial targeting, and then we do retargeting on Meta. But Reddit for us is an experiment to see if we can unlock another channel where we can target pretty effectively based on group membership, but the cost is low. And so we're seeing some green shoots. I wouldn't say we've completely unlocked it as a channel yet, but we're seeing enough potential that we're continuing to experiment there.
Well, I think it makes a lot of sense. And we have, this sort of attitude called be the best answer, and be the best answer wherever your customers are looking. So that, and this isn't, a novel particularly, but you look at all the channels where customers are spending their time. What are the centers of influence? Because obviously, especially in a B2B context, you need duplication, meaning that you need to have repeated endorsements sometimes in order to build that trust. And you have to have relevance and continuity, prevalence and those sorts of things. And so I think, companies need to investigate thoroughly those channels where customers are spending their time and where they are influenced by conversation, by community, and that sort of thing. And then find the most relevant way to be present there. That's the other thing, right? So using a LinkedIn point of view and bringing that to Reddit, no, that's not going to play. And vice versa might not play either. So I think it's smart for you to be there for sure. And speaking of LinkedIn, you personally create a tremendous amount of value on LinkedIn. And in fact, you inspired me to, be more in depth, actually, to be more thoughtful. Because I used to look at, even though, my company's provided services for LinkedIn to LinkedIn for over 10 years now. So I'm like thoroughly on team LinkedIn when it comes to that platform. And yet my own behavior there was really about distribution. I would create original ideas, of course, and then I would share things that we had published and thought of it as a distribution channel, not at the time, but in retrospect. And so I saw you starting to, a while ago, post more thoughtful pieces, kind of like mini blog posts almost. And I thought, God, that's great. I mean, I'm reading this whole thing every time Kathleen posts. I read the whole damn thing. And so I started thinking about it a little more that way, and I see some other people doing that, but I'm just kind of curious about your perspective on LinkedIn as an individual that's trying to create value. Do you have advice for people? Do you have rationale? What can you share?
I always kind of like self-deprecatingly joke that I'm like the least intentional LinkedIn creator on the planet. I did a post on this recently where I was like, let me share my 10-step framework on how I got to, because I just recently hit 30,000 followers. And I was like, just kidding. There is no framework, let alone a 10-step framework. I started this back in the late, I want to say sometime 2017, 2018, because there was this movement at the time of all men, coincidentally, posting, and people were calling it broetry, which was like this LinkedIn, like they started with these like little short sentence, multi-line posts. There was a very defined format to it.
Yeah.
And it was all guys, and it was sort of like the Church of Justin Welsh. And I remember at the time thinking, like, I am not going to let this be only guys that do this. And I didn't like set out to create broetry, but I was just like, if they're going to just build big followings on LinkedIn for posting these nonsensical things, like I'm going to post and see what happens. And so I sort of challenged myself, and I was like, let's see what would happen if you post to LinkedIn every day for a year. And there was a year, I think it was slightly more than a year, where I did exactly that. I posted every single day. I was really, really disciplined about it. I didn't really have like a plan as far as like, this is my editorial focus and these are my goals. I was just like, I'm just going to keep it as simple as one post a day. And I wasn't selling anything. So by the nature of it, it had to be kind of helpful. And I went under the assumption that like, if I was learning something, there had to be at least a few other people out there that either wanted to or were learning it as well. Because like, if you approach LinkedIn thinking you have to be the world's foremost expert in your topic in order to post, you're never going to post anything, because there's always going to be someone that's better than you, right? So you have to have that attitude of like, I'm a lifelong student and other people are as well. And the things I'm learning probably are going to be valuable to somebody. So it was a combination of like things I knew to be true from my experience, things that I was learning as I was learning them, like literally the questions in my head that I would be dealing with that day at work, I'd share, and random observations. So very little promotional stuff. And what's so interesting about the arc of my LinkedIn experiences, in many respects, I'm still doing exactly that, right? Like, I still kind of just share like what's on my mind that day. But the difference is that for many years, I worked for CEOs that did not like that I did that. They thought it was a vanity exercise. They thought that I was, like I literally had a CEO tell me once, it feels like you're telegraphing something you want to say to me through your LinkedIn. And I'd be like, no, this isn't about you. This is literally just like me. This is just me exposing my own thought process in public. And, I'm always careful not to like, I'm not negative on LinkedIn. I don't throw people under the bus. I don't criticize. That's not what I'm about as a person. So I just think like there were a lot of leaders that I worked for who thought of it as a distraction, but were willing to quote unquote indulge me. Then I got to Pavilion, and this is one of the things that I really have always appreciated about Sam Jacobs, who has a massive LinkedIn following that is much bigger than my own, is that he got it. Like before I even got there, he knew that this personal branding thing on LinkedIn was important, and that personal branding is not a distraction from the job. It is the job, because the way people buy and build trust has to do with personal brands. And so he had already started down this path at the same time that I had separately, and was building a following. And he's actually been way more consistent than me. I have to give him a lot of credit. I think he's got like 130,000 followers and I have 30,000. So, but what's been a real unlock for me is that he is like, go do it. I get the value. This is part of the job. And he appreciates the value that brings to Pavilion. And so I think that's like freed me up to explore other formats and do more. But so I've continued kind of trying to be regular and just share what I think and what I know and what I learn and add value.
Yeah. It sounds like you're fortunate to work with a very confident CEO, and maybe previously maybe that wasn't the case, because empowering people to like yourself, or empowering people in your organization to, share their point of view, casts a wider net of the thing that is most valuable. And that is a human connection, right? Not an advertising to human connection that has a role, obviously, but the human to human connection is even more powerful. So yeah, good for you. Good for Sam.
Yeah. Good for Sam. I really have to thank him for that.
So you've also been pretty open about your personal use and experimentation with AI. And I'm kind of wondering where you see some of the biggest opportunities and maybe even pitfalls when it comes to B2B marketers that are using AI as it relates to, social engagement or even engagement at large, like through a community.
Yeah, I feel like no matter what I say as an answer to this, I'll have people who hate it and people who love it. I'm just going to tell you the truth, and people can decide what they think. My take on it, this is just mine, and how I approach it, is that I always want the ideas to be my ideas and my thoughts and my point of view. But I have found, having now done this for 7 years, that you can waste a lot of unnecessary time trying to figure out how to package those ideas to specifically resonate on LinkedIn, because there are particular formats that worked well on LinkedIn. And it's like an inefficient use of time. And so I personally, and I've shared this publicly, what I like to do is I use Otter as my meeting assistant, and they have a mobile app, and I will open up Otter, which is essentially a transcription engine that has AI on top of it. And I'll just talk to it, and I'll be like, here's what I'm thinking today. This is my opinion on this thing. And here's the point I want to make and the insight I'm trying to share. And then I will word vomit into Otter, and I can do it literally like walking my dogs or sitting on the couch as the commercial airs in the evening, like when the thought strikes me. And then I download the TXT file from there and I put it into ChatGPT. I know ChatGPT has a voice interface, for those of you thinking this. I hate it. It craps out on me in the middle of a thought, and it's very inefficient. So that's why I do it this way. I load it into ChatGPT, and I have a long threaded conversation with ChatGPT that is all my LinkedIn posts. And I ask it to help me package it as a LinkedIn post. I take what it packages. I then lightly edit that because I still want it to sound like me. And I know what my voice and tone is, and I then post it. And so I have shared exactly this. I have said this on LinkedIn, and one person was like, this is why we're killing literature. And I was like, hold on, my ChatGPT usage for my LinkedIn post is not killing literature. Like,
no,
this is,
no.
I think everybody has to figure out how they want to use it for themselves, but call it executive function disorder, what have you. For me, I can come up with every idea you read is mine. Every point of view is mine. It comes out of I don't even ask ChatGPT for topics. I come up with topics, but it helps me phrase things. And I look at it as it's not that dissimilar from spell check and editing software. where, we've gotten used to using these things and they work. So why wouldn't you use them? And it saves me a ton of time. I don't use it for commenting. I respond to every single comment myself. And I think that for me, that's the line I don't want to cross. Like, I want that conversation to be very authentic.
Yeah, and that makes sense. It's not, what's the difference between that and an editor? We were so lucky to have a human editor.
Published author who's ever written a book has had an editor who has taken what they've written and made it sound better. So if that's the case, then literature was dead years and years ago.
So in your, you've had, we're both experienced. We've had our time in the business and marketing world, and everyone who's had some time in a field has had opportunities to learn lessons. And I'm kind of curious if there's some lessons, though, that you've learned about business, but it came from outside of a business situation, like through a hobby or a personal situation. I had a conversation with Ty Heath, who was training to be in the Olympics, and she talked about, how some of her history as an athlete had informed some things about her role as a marketer. And I'm just kind of curious if there's out of business, out of marketing lessons that you've learned about marketing.
Yeah, I think the theme of my response would be communication. And I think I've learned it probably most starkly in two different ways. One is through just marriage and like the work it takes to communicate well to sustain a marriage. Like it's work. You have to be proactive. You have to, as somebody I know once said, you have to own 200% of the conversation. And you have to be like committed to doing the hard stuff, to facing the things you don't want to face and talk about. And I think the same thing is true of work. And I would say that was amplified when I live, as I said, in Annapolis. It's a big sailing town. I'm a sailor, or at least I was in my younger years. I powerboat more now. But the thing that you learn in sailing, I used to crew in races on a small, like a J24, 24-foot sailboat. And I would be on the bow, the front of the boat. And when you're in a race, everything moves really quickly. And the skipper, as we were, navigating through other boats or changing direction because of wind or rounding a mark, they would jibe or tack, which are the terms for when you turn the boat. And on a small boat like that, you need to be prepared when that boat is going to turn, or as once happened to me, you will literally fall overboard. And because it happens that quickly and there's nothing to grab onto. And so I sailed with a couple of different skippers, most of whom would say, ready to tack, ready to jibe. That's a very common sailing term, like to tell your crew, we're about to do this. So prepare, grab onto something. And then I sailed with one skipper who just turned the boat. And he was kind of a jerk. He was like, you should just know, you're experienced. And I went overboard, and it was November and it was cold. And I was like close to hypothermia at one point. I mean, that was fine. I got back on the boat, but it was freezing. And I was like, I will never sail with that person again, because, it's about expectation setting. And again, owning 200% of the conversation, telling people where we're headed. I think this is true in business. You need to set that expectation. You need to paint a vision. You need to help people get there and create the conditions so that they can be successful. So I think like so much of success as a leader, whether you're a marketing leader or a sales leader or what have you, it all comes down, particularly when you get to the executive level, to your ability to communicate well, both in terms of your own persuasiveness, as well as your consensus building, your leadership with your team and your executive team peers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the parallel. I'm kind of curious as we wrap things up here, what is it that keeps you inspired or motivated in your career? And that can be people, books, the community itself, whatever. What inspires you?
Oh, it's such a good question. For better or for worse, I attach a lot of my own self-worth to my career. It is my hobby. I love what I do. I find a lot of fulfillment through my career. So I think there's just a high degree of inner motivation to satisfy my own expectations of myself. But that being said, you could, if that were true, you could say I'd be happy doing any career. And I don't think that's the case. Like, what I love about marketing and go to market is that, I was an entrepreneur once. I owned an agency. I had a second startup that failed miserably. So I've been a business owner, and I get the impact that it can have on you and your own family when your business fails, but also the families of the people that work for you, your community. Like there's this effect that it has on a lot of people. And I get a lot of satisfaction out of knowing that I can play a part. Like in this case, I'm helping to grow Pavilion, which helps, Sam is the owner. It helps his family. It helps my family because I work there, and the families of the people that work there, but it also helps all of our members. And I think that's part of the reason why I love working with this company particularly, is that I can help a business grow, which inherently is very satisfying to me, but that business has a really positive impact on people's lives to take us full circle, especially in those moments that really matter in their careers. Like we can really help them find that job, not get fired, be successful in the new role. And like, I see that every day in the community, and that gives me a tremendous amount of satisfaction and motivation.
Well, that's fantastic. And I that's a great way to wind this up, because I think the fact that you've been able to find your groove is it's pretty obvious how good you are at your job. And so there's this really interesting connection between, your passion and the cycle of, you have expectations, you're able to see impact pretty quickly, I think, in the things that you do, all the different things that you do. So they kind of feeds itself, I suppose. It's like you're in a unique situation to be able to do something that you're passionate about, and that feeds your excellence, which of course inspires, I'm sure, other people too. So I appreciate you sharing that. So where can people find out more about you and Pavilion?
Yeah, you can go to joinpavilion.com to learn more about Pavilion, and you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm very active there, and just say that you heard this podcast, and I'll definitely accept your connection request.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you.
Thanks so much for having me on the show.
I want to thank you for tuning in to the Beyond B2B Marketing Podcast. Make sure that you subscribe so that you can stay tuned for our next guest. And remember, there's no better time than now to break free of boring B2B.